speakers. They were very, very informative talks. It's great to see the exciting things that people are doing, but I've one question. Tom might have some views on this. What about incentivization? Cash is not always king in these environments to get the public involved. So what are your thoughts on the exciting things you've seen in incentivization?
Yeah, so I think intrinsic motivation is very important. And so, we see a lot of people participating in citizen science projects, simply because they're interested in getting involved. So, for example, some of the work that Zorn Popovich has done around science discovery games shows that people are willing to devote a significant amount of time to solving some of these problems. You want to add something to that?
I would say that's one, we're starting to find people who are expressing interest in formal credits for their informal STEM experiences, and as they see more and more of the researchers publish papers basically based on data that they're submitting, a small number of people are starting to think about how they might be formally accredited for their work.
And so, I don't know if this is on. There we go. Something else to think about, too, is there are citizen scientists and patient scientists who are not just doing things for free, but spending their own money in order to share the science back. I spent last weekend, I paid for my flights and my hotel and getting into the world's biggest diabetes scientific conference to present research from our community. So talking about incentives, even just lowering the cost to participate like a traditional researcher would be amazing. It doesn't have to be $1 million, but give us a free pass into the conference so we can share our research. And I think that will do a lot in terms of incentives.
Hi, Phil Feldman from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I'm curious about how you treat the difference between charismatic science, sort of popular science, and the less popular but maybe necessary science. I'm kind of thinking about the difference between tracking birds, which is this giant hobby that's been going on for hundreds of years, versus, say, building your own insulin pump, and the support structures that would be different between those two.
Well, my experience is just in diabetes and doing what's necessary. It is interesting to see there's a lot of people who think it's not necessary.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of pushback and a lot of friction and a lot that people go up against too. And I think what's interesting will be for the companies to start to recognize the benefits of people who find it necessary to innovate, because we're basically doing research for them. We're sharing our code, we're sharing our information, we're sharing our data, and we're saying, here's what the market needs from you. Please do this and do it faster. So I think what will be great is when people start to merge the traditional approach to that with the new forms of science that are coming out.
I don't know. I mean, it feels a little bit like a judgment call, because there's some projects that at first glance just look like a game, but under it, it's powering research on Alzheimer's. So that's not a great answer, but it feels like an interesting judgment call that I don't know how to make.
While we're passing the mic for the next question, I'm not sure if this is, you can hear me, but I just want to ask you, since we have a community here that blends research and practice, you've all alluded to research that's been done. I'm curious, what's the research that hasn't been done that you would most like to see to help build the case around citizen science more broadly, or participatory medicine, or the policy implications of citizen science? Where are the gaps in the research literature?
There's, I can say that there is a ton of research I wish you would please do. There's a lot of things that we've observed anecdotally N of one times, say, 20 or 50 people, and there's still a lot of pushback. Well, it's not been traditionally studied. Well, study it. Prove us right or prove us wrong. That needs to be done, but oftentimes these communities have a whole list of things that if they had the time, they would do research studies on, but we don't have those resources. If you have the resources, we'd love to collaborate. And I don't know if this is true. I perceive that there's probably people worry about, what am I going to research next? How am I going to have enough to cover a career in this area? I promise you, we will keep it coming. We're not going to run out of ideas or things that we need to study, because we're constantly observing and experimenting and learning and needing people to scale that research.
One might dovetail nicely with a network of innovators, and this is where people get involved in a project, and these tend to be short-term projects, right? So now you've trained them on something, they've become experienced in some area, and then they're done because the grant ended for that project, it just went away. and how to kind of identify and categorize the experiences that they have gained from that. We also don't know how to do that, but it would be neat to be able to translate that over to some of the work that you're doing there so that they can be readily available for that next project as well.
So traditionally, when the scientific community has thought about investing in research infrastructure, we think about pushing the boundaries of performance, and as a result, we get things like the gazillion-dollar Large Hadron Collider, the $9 billion James Webb Space Telescope. And those investments are important for advancing the frontiers of human knowledge. But the thing that we're not paying enough attention to is how to advance democracy, participation, and access. So there are some researchers who are beginning to define what they call the field of frugal science, which is to say, what if our goal was to allow more people to participate? So one researcher at Stanford, for example, has developed a $3 microscope that allows you to see individual bacteria and has ideas for developing a really low-cost electron microscope that would allow citizens to see viruses. People like David Lang have developed open source underwater robots that are dramatically increasing the number of people who can engage in ocean science. So I think that getting the research community to say what are the areas where low-cost, easy-to-use tools would dramatically increase opportunities for participation would be a good agenda-setting exercise.
Awesome. I think the mic went somewhere over here, if I'm not mistaken. Where did the mic end up? Whoever has it, you should use it.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question relating to citizen science. So to start with, requesting Darlene's response. Okay, I think that citizen science is extremely important, especially in many different countries, okay, many different societies. My question is relating to the USA. Now, our country here is technologically one of the most advanced ones in the world. And it's one of the very few countries, maybe the only one, where, for example, evolution biology is still considered by some people as one of several possible belief systems. And something like citizen science on a large scale is needed to change that. Now, do you see that happening? Have you seen that happening? And what do you think are the measures to be pursued in the context of citizen science to make that, to normalize that kind of attitude?
Well, that's a very good question. We do see citizen science projects that their title and the reason why people may have selected it to get involved in don't use the word evolution, yet by the very nature of the project, people are learning about evolution. This is not something that I have studied, but there are people at NC State University who have a whole public science cluster that are starting to look at that. It's a big question, too. I mean, information and knowledge is power, and I think the more that we can make these projects and opportunities accessible to people, the better. There is another issue that kind of relates back to what Tom was saying of making it easier for people to get involved, and it is the very real fact that it's still a bit of a luxury to be able to get involved in these projects. Just the lack of time that most people have is an issue. It's not answering your question directly, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to keep pointing that out. If we really want to try to reach more and more people and make it possible for the people who usually are not involved in these science conversations to be involved in these science conversations, we need a radically different approach.
I'm so glad you brought that up because constantly over the last 2.5 years, I keep getting told, oh, you should start a company. Oh, you should create a nonprofit. You should, quit your job and do this. Well, I had a full-time day job when I was doing this on the side. I didn't want to quit and do this. I didn't think that was the right thing to do. And there are just very limited paths that people are encouraged to follow. And we need to find more ways for somebody who just has 5 minutes on a weekend and wants to get involved in science or, experiment with their healthcare. Different ways for people to do that, and that will help with the access problem, which we absolutely need to keep talking about because it's a real issue.
Can I just add a remark? Something similar is happening in connection with climate science, and that's become very politicized, but I'm just saying that it also applies there.
Where did the mic land now? Please.
Hi. Amazing presentations. So much value seems to be created by Each of these projects, billions of dollars, real life gains. But it seems like economic theories are somewhat blind to this value because the labor exchange doesn't look right or whatever. But my question for each of you really is this really economically charity work at this point? Volunteer effort? And how, or is that just a perception? It's not really charity. And how do you bridge this to sustainability?
Can I suggest we take one more question and then your answer? Sure. So Natalia has the mic. Let's get that question and pass the mic to someone in the back who was waiting there. So we'll ask two and then get an answer.
So I'm Natalia Lavina. Amazing start of collective intelligence. Thank you, Beth. Thanks, everybody. I have a very specific question, so I don't know if it makes sense to combine it with others. And it's to Dana, whose story is super inspirational. I'm wondering, how do you deal with the regulatory challenges? Are you allowed to give the device to other people? I'm a parent of children who have severe allergies, so I've looked at this do-it-yourself EpiPens, and I realized, I don't know if I can trust them. I know that the EpiPen in the market that used to cost $500, has just been recalled because, a couple of people had trouble with it. So, and similarly, the question of HIPAA and sharing data with doctors and with each other. And so that makes it broader to the rest of the panel. There are lawyers here. When it comes to regulation of these do-it-yourself devices and this sharing of data and this seems to be a real barrier. And maybe that's why it takes 5 years for companies to get it through FDA.
Yeah. Well, I actually see a bridge between the two questions. So to answer this specifically about regulatory, this is DIY, and I emphasize the N of one because it is non-commercial activity. Therefore, it is not regulated by the FDA. So that has pros, which is I'm able to do it without being regulated by the FDA, but the cons are it's up to each individual to evaluate the available information and decide if it's right for them. This comes back to the burden of time and access and information, and is it a condition in which you can safely experiment? Some people decide that they don't want to do DIY open APS for their kids. There's been people who've done it on 1-year-olds, and they've decided it's absolutely going to help them and their kids. It's a very personal decision. And we've also run into issues where there's some healthcare providers who absolutely embrace and support people who are doing this, and others who said, I can't help you, and if you're going to do that, you need to go find another doctor. So there's an interesting issue there. And then to the other question about economic charity, I'm actually trying to work on a study with a group of economists at MIT to really categorize and track how much time was spent doing that. One of the theories they want to make is comparing the commercial device and how much it's spent to make that, years and years and billions and gazillions and whatever the number of dollars is compared to that. But what I'm pushing back and saying is we spent probably hundreds, if not thousands of hours developing our first generation algorithm. We've spent thousands, for sure, hours continuing to develop in the last 3 years and helping people. Which of those do you count as a cost just in terms of the financial time aspect? I think that's something that we do need to track because that is time away from jobs, time away from family, time away from whatever, and there's absolutely an economic impact that we need to be thinking about there.
Yeah, and I don't know that most people look at it as a charity. Most of that research just could not get done any other way without people involved in it.
So there's some interesting work that's being done by the community of scholars that study user-driven innovation. And one of the things that they've had some success on is getting European governments to start adding it to the equivalent of their census so that we can have a better sense for to what extent user-driven innovation is contributing to their economies, because if we have some way of tracking that, I think that'll increase the amount of attention that it gets from policymakers in terms of enabling it.
We have time for a brief question in the back.
My question probably applies to all three of you regarding your experience in that field.
Tell us who you are, too.
Oh, I'm sorry. Emmanuel from Helmut Schmidt University in Hamburg. What do you think, how will traditional roles change over time, being it traditional manufacturers, being it traditional scientists? What do you think? Will there be new roles? Will there be a merging of roles? Or is it just the sheer craft, so scientists doing scientific work, and the manufacturer just manufacturing? What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, we already see some scientists embracing this, particularly in those areas where they're generating data at a faster rate than we know how to analyze the data. So I think some professionals are going to view their role as enabling a much broader community.
Yeah, just from a professional track, we keep running into people who have these weird pathways into citizen science, which makes sense because you don't go to school to become a citizen scientist. So we may see some of that even start to change, where more people can study how to become professional people who facilitate citizen science.
And I think we'll always have people in these roles, but I think what will change is the collaboration. So instead of just science to science collaboration, you're going to see a patient. So in my case, I'm actually the lead PI on a project with Eric Heckler and Eric Johnson from Arizona State University, where I'm the lead PI. I'm the scientific PI doing the science, and I've got a team that's helping participate in the research, but I'm driving that. So that's a new academic-patient partnership that's not existed before. And we have companies who are looking at our open source code and having conversations with us about the science and the data behind it and the design elements and the thought and the usability. And so there's these new collaborations that are going to happen across these different stakeholder roles. And I think that's what we're going to see as part of that first loop. That's how we're going to start to do that. But I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in that second and third loop, so to speak, in the future.
So 10-second magic laptop question for all of you. Given what we've seen, the tremendous potential on the citizen science side, what is the one thing that you would like, Tom, if I can constrain the magic laptop to what NSF should do differently? Is that fair? Or DARPA, or fill in your blank of your favorite science agency? What's the implication for policy? Just a 10-second, what would you like the headline to be?
Make it possible for patients to be submitting and applying and doing the science without having to have a partnership, but also with the support of these traditional institutions.
Ooh, she listened to you.
Yeah. Very similar. I did not get my first National Science Foundation grant until it had to go through Arizona State University. I mean, it would be nice to be able to, I love ASU, but make it possible for more individuals and citizen scientists to have access to those funds.
I would like to see the science agencies devote some of the money that they're currently spending on the development of new tools to focus not just on performance, but also on participation and access.
Whew. With that, let me thank the panel for their brilliance and their efficiency.